let's talk about cholesterol. Um,
Okay.
I know for many years there was seemed to be a general consensus that high cholesterol was not a good thing,
Mhm.
and that it contributed to heart disease, cardiovascular disease. And then it seems like in the last maybe 5 or 10 years, there's been this big pushback, mainly among people who are very heavy meat eaters, paleo and keto and carnivore type advocates who are basically trying to say, no, your cholesterol is great. Cholesterol doesn't matter. High cholesterol is fine. You know, and I'd love for you to weigh in on this.
Yeah, that's a great point. I listen to different podcasts and YouTube channels of some people who push, this protein, the animal protein based diets. Of note, many of them have been a little bit quiet given some of the data in the recent pandemic related to high protein diet versus high animal protein diet versus a plant based diet because there was some problems with the high protein animal protein diet. But to weigh in on the cholesterol, here's my take on it in general. Um, when we look at one biomarker, I don't care if it's cholesterol or C-reactive protein or whatever the case may be, you're just looking at one biomarker. And that one biomarker is going to be abnormal for perhaps a number of reasons. And yes, in cardiology, we traditionally look at high LDL cholesterol being a major risk factor for cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular death. And it's one of those things that we put a lot of emphasis in, but certain medications, get the LDL down, et cetera. But there's been some data showing that looking at reduction in LDL hasn't had as strong of an impact on survival. You look at meta-analysis and stuff as we initially thought. But even that, from my standpoint, is not so important because when I look at an abnormal lipid profile, I think of it in the context of abnormal metabolism and abnormal hepatic or abnormal liver function. I like to think of it that way as opposed to saying, well, your LDL cholesterol is high, you must get it down to prevent this outcome. If you remember Colin Campbell in his data in the China study, they also saw a correlation with elevated LDL cholesterol with cancer and there are other diseases. So that it's not just so LDL cholesterol, yes, we can show that there may be a contributing factor of having all of these fatty particles floating around in your blood that contributes to atherosclerosis. I'm not saying that's not the case. But you also have to consider the fact that these increased biomarkers are also a signal of underlying metabolic abnormalities. And to just turn the biomarker down or reduce the biomarker doesn't necessarily get to the core of the metabolic abnormality. You may reduce the amount of LDL cholesterol in the blood, and maybe you don't have as much, plaque in the arteries, but the biochemical and physiological abnormality is still there, especially from the standpoint of the liver. Because if your cholesterol metabolism is off, that means biochemical reactions are not happening that should happen, and so there's an imbalanced biochemistry, and you need to get back balance. And so instead of just using a drug to get that one number down, we need to step back and look at a process that's going to bring the body into biochemical balance. That number will come down naturally, but it's coming down because the biochemical process is normalizing, not because you're forcing one biochemical reaction, but not affecting trillions of others.
That makes sense. And there's two major contributors to high cholesterol. Obviously, eating it is one.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
When you're eating animal food, you're eating cholesterol.
mm-hmm.
And then the other is your liver is producing cholesterol
That's right.
as that's part of normal liver function. So what you're saying is abnormal liver function, suboptimal metabolic function, whatever, that can trigger a person's liver to just produce more cholesterol. And it's probably some kind of protective response. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It could be a protective response. I mean, the body is making adjustments in many different ways, and so you can call them protective, you can call them just ways the body will adjust. But I've had situations where I have made certain medication adjustments for patients. So these are patients that come in, their cholesterol's high, they get on a plant-based diet, they're compliant. the numbers don't change away. But once I start making medication adjustments, these are medications that are cleared hepatically, then the cholesterol will come down. So you can get, improvements in cholesterol by means other than just by reducing fat or putting them on a cholesterol lowering drug. There are other medications you can make adjustments on. I've seen where it'll come under control. So you have to look at the total biochemistry of what's going on.
That's a really good point that I think, maybe there are folks out there that haven't thought about this or heard about it, is that they could be on a medication that could be promoting high cholesterol or cholesterol production in the liver. Thanks for watching. If you like what you just saw, why not subscribe? Here's a link to do that. And if you'd like to watch the full interview, you can find it at chrisbeatcancer.com. There's a link to it in the description right below this video.